Loki, I've studied almost every moment of your entire life. You've literally stabbed people in the back like 50 times.
Why never do it again?
What's up everybody, welcome to this review of Loki, a continuation of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, focusing on, of course, Loki, played by Tom Hiddleston. Here at Avengers Endgame, he gets a hold of the Tesseract. This is the Loki from the first Avengers movie. He then goes on a bit of a spree and he goes through time, and then all of a sudden the TVA shows up. And well, that's when the mysteries start to unfold and the questions start coming in rapid form. Lots of mysteries, lots of questions. What did I think of this TV show? I think this is a very good TV show. I think it's borderline great. I think it's got some really cool ideas and concepts in there. And I do think if you want to compare this to other Marvel TV shows, I think this is the best one so far. I think it's better than WandaVision, I think it's better than The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Let's not compare it to any others because it's a little unfair to do that. So, Loki seems to be a mishmash of various things, from X-Files to Control to Doctor Who. It's a lot of these science fiction, time travel, mysterious alien sort of conspiracy theory kind of things all put together into one show. And it works really well. I think the whole show is very well executed. From the sets, the costumes, the writing, the directing, the acting, it's all really quite good. And as such, there's a mix of science fiction, comedy, action, and dramatics as well in there. And all of that works really well as well. The comedy isn't distracting, the comedy doesn't feel like it's out of place or anything. It's very naturalistic as well. 6 episodes long, I do think the show is pretty well paced. There are a couple of episodes in the middle where maybe they could have trimmed them down and turned them into one. Maybe they could have just had 5 episodes this season, arguably. But that's really getting nitpicky, so I'm not going to argue that point too much. But one of the big praises I have to give about the storytelling of the show is that there are some huge ideas and concepts in here which any other show would have presented, and it could have been really convoluted, could have been really confusing, but this show actually takes its time to simplify it and to dive into some of these themes and messages and what it's getting into. In that there are huge moments in this show where there are just 2 characters sitting down having a conversation and talking about the implications of everything they're saying and doing. It's really interesting for a Marvel superhero TV show to just slow things down a little bit. And these conversations, by the way, they're not boring either. They are really well written. They are character development moments as well as exposition moments. And in relation to that and the pacing and so on, is that each episode ends on a sort of cliffhanger. It leaves you wanting more each and every time. It constantly builds the momentum. Yeah, there are slower moments in the show where individual episodes I do think have some pacing issues, but on the season as a whole, I do think the way in which it builds the main plot line and the dramatics behind Loki and what he's doing, I do think that works pretty well. But like I said, there are some moments where they are slowing things down just a little too much for my taste. And the last thing I want to talk about in terms of the story is the possibilities for future Marvel properties, in that there's a lot of teasers in this season, there's a lot of hinting at things to come. Kang the Conqueror, for example. There's a lot of stuff about him in this show where if you're not a huge Marvel comic book fan, fine, you're not going to notice any of that stuff, it's not going to impact you big time, but if you are, there's a lot of juicy possibilities there. And hell, even beyond that, with things like the X-Men and the Fantastic Four and so on and so forth, and even just like recasting certain characters and doing alternate versions of certain characters, this show really opens up the world of possibilities for the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it's very tantalizing and really interesting. So let's talk about the characters. Loki himself, played by Tom Hiddleston, is great. Tom Hiddleston nails this character. He has a way of diving into whether this character is good or bad. Of course, this is the Loki from the first Avengers movie, so we first see him as the bad guy. And then as we progress through this, we realize, no, there's more layers to him. He doesn't quite become the lovable, quirky, humorous guy that we saw in Thor Ragnarok, but he becomes a variation of that, or a variant of that, you could say. And there's room here for him to be more serious and dramatic and to have more like emotional content in there, while also being funny and humorous and quirky at the same time. It's a really layered, well-developed performance, I think. And Tom Hiddleston, I think, is really, really good in this role. And before I go on, let me just say that I am going into spoilers in this review. I haven't said too much so far, but the next point I'm going to make is going to be a spoiler for, what, episode 2 or 3? So you've been warned, this is a spoiler-filled review. Sylvie, the person who initially Loki is hunting down, a variant of himself, a female Loki. And she's a new addition here. I'm not that familiar with the actor. Maybe if I look her up and I'll say, oh, I've seen her in a bunch of things. I don't know, but she's brilliant. She is one of the best things in this show. She's one of the biggest surprises in this show, in that she is, to me, unfamiliar actor working alongside Tom Hiddleston and Owen Wilson, and she's standing her ground. She's stealing the scene, so to say. She's a badass, and her backstory is super interesting. The fact that there is like a mystery running throughout. It's like, right, what exactly are your origins? What exactly is your motivation? Why are you doing this? A lot of that's really teased out very well, and we get some satisfying answers for that. But it's not just her doing a female version of Tom Hiddleston. This is very much her own take on Loki. It's her own depiction of Loki, and I like that. And there's a lot of other depictions of Loki in this show as well, and I like that it's not just, oh, here's Tom Hiddleston, but played by someone else. No, it's actually them doing their own version of Loki and what Loki can be. And Sylvie in particular is arguably smarter than Tom Hiddleston's Loki. She's definitely more aggressive and more fierce than Tom Hiddleston's Loki, and more determined, I would say, as well. But there are hints here and there of a fun side to them, and one of the elements that runs through this the moment they meet is that there's like this hinting at a romantic subplot, which I'm not sure how I feel about this, because it works very well in the show. I like it, but when you really think about the implications of this, it's odd. There's a slight uncomfortable nature to it, because they are different people, but they're also the same person. There's almost like an incestuous nature to it, and yeah, it's a weird thing, and it's something that the show kind of hints at but doesn't dive into, because hey, it's a Marvel show. There's only so much of that you can get into. It's not a Game of Thrones after all. But yeah, that stuff works really well. It's really interesting, but yeah, there is like an uncomfortable element to it. Then you got Owen Wilson. Owen Wilson is the buddy cop relationship of this show. He is Loki's sidekick, essentially, although he's kind of calling the shots, so maybe he's not the sidekick, maybe Loki's his sidekick, I don't know. But Owen Wilson is essentially just Owen Wilson with a mustache, yeah, and that's great. I like Owen Wilson. He's a good actor. He's got really good chemistry with Loki. They've got a really good buddy cop connection, and constant hinting about him wanting to be on a jet ski and all that, that's great. Lots of comedic elements here with Owen Wilson, even if Owen Wilson's kind of playing it really deadpan. So let's talk a bit about the villains. So the main villain of this show is arguably the judge character played by Gugu Mbatha-Raw. I like her as an actor. I think she's brilliant as an actor. I think she does a good job in this role. The problem is the role isn't the juiciest. The role isn't the most interesting. She has this backstory that isn't really presented to us. She has her own goals and motivations which are only hinted at and again not presented to us. So it makes rooting for her and understanding everything she says and does a little tough. How much is she lying? How much is she telling the truth? Why is she saying and doing what she's doing? It's really hard to tell. So much of this show, because of the mystery element of it, so much of the show can be a little on the frustrating side in that we don't know who's good, who's bad, what their motivations are. It kind of leaves us pondering things, kind of leaves us in the unknown and then making some assumptions here. And the answers do come, but they're not always the answers we want. And this is especially in relation to the villains and TVA itself. So the timekeepers are another thing. For the first half of this season, we are led to assume that the timekeepers are going to be the big bad of this show. They're the ones that are dictating everything. They're the ones that are in control. And then there's a reveal of where they aren't necessarily in control, where they aren't dictating things, and they aren't at all what anyone thought they were. And the reveal is a little underwhelming, especially since you can't understand what they're saying. But let's get into the production side of things. The sets and costumes, I've already said, are brilliant. Each of the sets has like interesting patterns and colours and unique looks to them. Like, you do spend a lot of time where just characters are sitting down talking to each other on these sets and locations, so they do get a lot of utilization from these sets, and that's really cool and interesting. A lot of little details in the background and so on and so forth for Marvel fans to dive into. It's brilliant. What I think is the secret highlight of this show is the score and the music. The score, the music, the soundtrack is brilliant. Really, really good. I think this is going to get loads of awards when it comes to that stuff next year, because it's not eligible this year. But the soundtrack is like spooky and mysterious and ominous, but also epic and empowering at the same time. And I'm not just talking about the main theme song, that is really cool, but I'm talking about like the big epic moments when they're going into like big fight scenes and so on, where they're doing big reveals. The score is just amazing. It's one of the best I've heard in a long time. That's really like stood out as like, wow, that's great. Because often enough when you're watching a TV show or a film, the score kind of blends in and you don't notice it so much. But this time it really pops and stands out because of how good it is. But the whole aesthetic and looks, just to get back to the sets and the costumes, is very like 70s sci-fi. It's as if you went back to the 70s, designed the show based on 70s aesthetic of like, right, what could a science fiction show in 2020 look like? And that's kind of like what they went for. And it's really cool. It's almost got like a British sci-fi kind of feel to it as well. Again, tying into maybe the Doctor Who inspirations a bit as well. But in relation to this, the cinematography is good, the visuals are good lighting throughout the show, it's very well lit, there's lots of like moody shadows and tones in there as well. The one thing where I'm a little nitpicky on, well, not even nitpicky, I think it does stand out as at times just bad, is the CGI. The CGI, this of course is a TV show, not a movie, so the CGI isn't movie quality, it doesn't have the budget behind it. But there's moments, particularly in the middle chunk of the series, when they are on this planet which is about to explode, not explode, but have like asteroids crash into it. They're running through these sets and you can clearly tell that they are on a set where there's a huge green screen in front of them. And there are moments when they clearly run up to the edge of the set and they have to back off again, and the borders and the way it's framed and set up just isn't great, and the CGI isn't brilliant. It's good for a TV show, and it's definitely a big budget TV show, but the seams of the CGI are visible, particularly in these moments. And for a Marvel property, that's kind of disappointing. So just a miscellaneous point that I want to get into before I end this review. The second last episode I think is the best episode of the season. Here we have Loki essentially going to the end of time as we know it to try and find out who's running things. And in this episode we discover that everyone who's ever been pruned, as they call it, or I should say pruned, ends up in this time zone, and all the other Lokis that have been hunted down and pruned are here as well. So we see Kid Loki, we see this other Loki whose name I'm forgetting off the top of my head, then you see Classic Loki played by Richard E. Grant, and we see Alligator Loki, which is hilarious. All of these different Lokis are really well cast, really well thought up, and Richard E. Grant in particular is a standout. Of course he's a brilliant actor, so of course he's going to stand out a bit more. But in this one episode they really make us care for particularly Classic Loki, and they make them stand out, they make them their own characters. They are, again, they're not just doing, right, here's an alternate version of Tom Hiddleston, they're doing their own take on Loki. Richard E. Grant's Loki, Classic Loki, should be noted, is just Tom Hiddleston's Loki, but older. So his is much more like Tom Hiddleston than anyone else's. Alligator Loki, and what they've talked about with him, and the fact that no one's actually sure if he is a Loki, which could make him the perfect Loki. So the fact that Alligator Loki's in there is just hilarious. The fact that he comes in and bites off someone's hand at some point, there's like a President Loki who shows up. It's all hilarious, it's all really well done. That one episode I think is great. And you know what, that's my review of Loki. I liked it a lot. I think this is the best Marvel Cinematic TV show so far, and I do recommend it, of course, if you're a Marvel fan. I think it does have problems when it comes to CGI. I think in the middle point, the story loses its way a little bit. Maybe they could have tightened that up a bit, but otherwise it's a great TV show, really well done. The sets, the visuals, the concepts, the ideas in here are brilliant. Will we get more? I don't know. I kind of hope we don't. I kind of like the idea of having all these Marvel limited TV shows. If we do get another series of Loki, make it completely different. Move it away from the TVA. Do something different, a different storyline. Make it more like a TV sequel or a film sequel rather than a continuation of a TV show. That would be my advice. But anyway, I like Loki quite a bit. I had a lot of fun with it. Tom Hiddleston's brilliant. If you've liked this review, why not subscribe to my channel to get more content like this, and follow me on Twitter and Instagram at _GrabBurton. Until next time though, thanks for watching.